Good evening, everyone, and welcome to session number 10 of the seminar series of Journey of Discarding Self. I can't believe this is the 10th week in a row we've done this. That's a lot of weeks. So thanks for hanging out. Fewer people are watching it live and more people are watching it taped, which is fine. But I thank everyone who's coming tonight and to hang out and to listen to what I got to share for tonight. Tonight's seminar number 10 is about anger and resentment. And this is a really important fundamental thing that we have to deal with in our life if we're going to be happy, joyous, and free and contentment in our life. And so you find out very quickly that there is not a life that is dominated by anger and resentment that will ever find contentment and joy. Most of us see that as probably an obvious truth, but because many of us have seen people who've been dominated by anger and resentment and the destruction it has had on their life and the people who are in their life. But a lot of times we really don't take the time to look deep into ourselves and search for the pockets of anger that we enjoy keeping. Almost no one wants to be angry enough to destroy someone or kill someone. But when we harbor deep anger and resentment, most of the time the person who gets destroyed is us, not other people. And I think that's one of the big things that we don't realize when we hold grudges and resentments is that resentment is like the poison we drink ourselves to hurt other people. We think that, that our anger is justified and it's righteous and we have a right to be angry and all stuff like that. So before we get into it too deep, I really want to talk a little bit about the difference between being angry and having a resentment. So let's start with resentment because it's easier. I would propose that resentment starts from anger, but it's just not any anger. Resentment comes from unresolved anger issues in our life. The root meaning of the word resent is resentire, which means to refeel over and over again a past emotional encounter. And depending on the individual, that encounter could have been 2 hours ago or it could have been 20 years ago. And I've seen resentments last for decades with people only to destroy them and the people who are around them. Because unresolved anger stews over and over and over, and it usually bubbles over at times into our life where the person we're angry at isn't even around anymore. And it really is a serious issue. So now that we know that resentment is a refeeling of old anger, and it's unresolved anger issues from the past, we got to then figure out, okay, where does anger really come from? What's really anger about? There are 1,000 ideas out there about anger. You can read books on it. But I like to put forward a simple explanation that's worked for me. It's not the only explanation, but I think it's an explanation that's simple and is easily managed. And if you want to go into all that other stuff, go right ahead. But I'm not interested in all the psychobabble. I'm interested in a solution to my anger problems, not, some psychological dreamboat idea of what it actually is. So, and I would like to, in my personal life, I have chosen to say that my anger is unresolved or caused by unresolved emotional pain or stress. And what I mean by that is that unresolved is that many people really have no idea why they get angry. Because they have no idea why they're angry, they've never dealt with the underlying issues that cause this anger agitation to come to the surface so easily. I hear it all the time. People use expressions like, he made me angry. They made me angry. If you didn't do that, I would get angry. And all these expressions reveal that most people have no idea how and why they actually get angry, because the first step in dealing with your anger is it's your anger. Our anger is never someone else's fault, ever. No one makes you angry. We choose to be angry, and we've chosen to be angry in the past, and we choose to carry that angry around, those angry emotions around. That's why we end up with resentments, okay? Once we begin to take responsibility for our anger, our own anger, we can begin to look at anger in a healthy manner. If we are unwilling to own our own anger, we are at the mercy of other people, and we've actually given control of our emotions to others. And then we become emotional slaves to whomever makes us angry. That is not freedom. That is not happy, joyous, and free. You are enslaved to people who have control over your emotions, who have the ability to manipulate your emotions. And anger is the most easily manipulated emotion probably in the human being, because we don't really get to the root causes of a lot of our anger, why we get so angry. I mean, let's face it, when you're out on the road driving and some guy's an idiot on the road, there's no reason to get so pissed off to run him off the road with road rage. The situation does not warrant the outrageous reaction and anger that we have. That's because there's anger already there that just needs to be lit. And it's not the situation, it's that there's this unresolved anger thing going on in our soul that needs to be resolved. When we get upset and angry over a small little thing, and our anger is such an overreaction, it's obvious to everybody but us that there's something else going on. Well, that's the problem with us. We don't want to figure out what's going on. We'd rather be angry. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But the first step in understanding what anger really is about is that anger is actually a secondary emotion. It's not a primary emotion. There's always something else that precedes us getting angry. Usually it's an emotion that we don't want to deal with, okay? The most common emotions that we like to avoid that precede anger are hurt and frustration. And hurt and frustration are caused by a variety of things that cause emotions. Examples: abandonment, right? Behavior of abandonment by other people. Verbal violence of other people against us. Bullying when we're young kids. Or perceived wrongs that people we think have put against us. There's sexual abuse, there's physical abuse, there's harassment. There's all kinds of things that are unresolved hurts in our life that become anger. But some people, it's as simple as they can't get their own way, and their selfishness just gets pinched, But always, anger is preceded by something else. It's never the first thing. What happens in most people's lives is, by the time you become an adult, you skip right over the primary emotion so quickly, you jump right to anger. And you really don't even realize that something else happened, because you've programmed yourself to react with anger, okay? So you have to ask yourself a very simple question. Why do we like to be angry? Because if we didn't like to be angry, we wouldn't choose to be angry. And that's really important to understand. We choose to be angry, okay? Why is it, and what is it, that in some sick manner in us, we like to be angry? Some of us actually love to be angry. Some people really prefer to be angry than anything else. And you know those people. You could probably pick them out in a heartbeat in your mind right now. Their face will come to you. It's like, that guy's one angry dude. Always angry, pissed off. Anything lights him or her on fire, I think the answer is very simple, and it never occurs to us when we're really trying to get well. And that's because we lack the experience in it. But emotions like deep hurt, frustration, and sadness are way too difficult for us to sit in and actually embrace. We don't want to experience them on a deep emotional level. And so what do? We run from the feelings. Nobody really wants to revisit those kinds of feelings. And so we hide from those feelings by being angry. And so why do we do that? Why is anger so appealing? Because there has to be an appeal for it to become our go-to mechanism. Okay? So I think we're running from stuff, running away from stuff because we don't want to deal with it, you know? Deep hurt and frustration and sadness are emotions that really make us feel vulnerable, and for some of us, especially men, make us feel very weak. We don't like feeling weak. We don't like feeling vulnerable. We don't like being exposed. And so when we feel those types of feelings, we feel emotionally out of control. That's why a lot of people don't like to cry, because they don't feel like they can control when and where they're going to cry, so they just shut that waterworks off. They just lock that down. They don't cry at all. You know, big boys don't cry, that kind of crap. Or some women who've been abused learn to become very emotional, become very logical, like Spock-like. Those are dangerous women to be around because they can be brutal as men can be, you know? So the thing that's really appealing about anger, that I believe, is that anger brings an illusion of control. You know, but even more dangerous than the illusion of control is the illusion of power. And when we feel vulnerable and out of control, there's nothing like feeling power and control to bring us out of a position of weakness, you know. But anger never brings its full power until it's stewed into resentment. And when I was a young man, I could pour my anger into the pot of resentment and stoke it until it boiled over. And once I had reached that point, my anger would let me do things I could never do without it. I could harm people. I could get even. Revenge is the tool of resentment. And I was all about it. The first, you know, forms, well, there's two forms of revenge in our culture that are very much used by people who love resentment and anger. The first one is passive aggressive behavior. And, you know, passive aggressive behavior stems from resentment, and then it's a mechanism to withhold love from people who we're resentful against. We don't overtly hurt them. We make them suffer by not loving them. A good example is the person who likes to portray the cold shoulder when there's a fight. I just won't talk to you for a week. That's very abusive behavior. It's actually emotionally violent, but it is a passive aggressive anger mechanism to deal with the fight and not deal with the fight at the same time. The second, of course, is outright revenge. Due to the fact that most of us have some kind of moral compass, we seldom practice outright harm to people. But, you know, we all know of and sometimes have participated in character assassination, which is well within the bounds of revenge for almost every person I've ever met. Gossip and slander are the kissing cousins of character assassination of revenge. You know, a person who is steeped in anger and resentment will never be able to serve the Lord in any capacity very long. For their anger and their resentment are too destructive to build long-lasting relationships. They can't stop from keeping score. And this whole thing about keeping score is very important. It's you can't develop long-term loving relationships with people if you live in resentment and anger, because you'll always keep score. You'll never forgive. You'll always do passive-aggressive behavior by withholding love, giving the cold shoulder. You know, like women love to withhold sex from men. Men like to withhold their presence from their wives or money. They pull their money back. There's a lot of passive-aggressive behaviors that we do when we're pissed off. You know, so it's really important for us to make sure that we look at this in all facets of our life and to see where these things come up and how they come up and why they come up. You know, the only way to get out from underneath a life that's run by anger and resentment is to take responsibility for your own emotions. And that goes back to what I said earlier. No one makes us angry. We choose to be angry. And you need to come with terms to that fact. If you can't come to terms with that, you'll never get well. You'll always be pissed off, and you'll always be hurting the people who you say you love with your anger. But we must do the hard work of finding out what underlies our anger. Are we hurt? Are we frustrated? Are we reliving something from the past in the present? Like a past experience being like a scab picked by a present person. That happens a lot in abandonment issues. I mean, if you date someone who's got abandonment issues, it's going to be a long haul because it never goes away until that person deals with the abandonment issue, you know? So we have to look at, why are we hurt? Why are we frustrated? Why are we hurt? You know, what made me frustrated? What part did I play in that? You know, but inevitably we have to come to terms with what actually happened and who it happened with. Those are the two things that we must deal with. What happened and who did it happen with? Now, anybody who's listening here who's been through the 12 steps knows that's exactly what the fourth step is about. Who is it? What happened? And how did it affect me? And this is the type of stuff that takes a lot of time and effort and work to go digging through your life to figure this stuff out. If you want to be free, you got to do it. And I don't know about you, but I lived in bondage long enough that I wasn't interested in being in bondage to anybody anymore. I was in bondage to myself and to others, and bondage to alcohol, and in bondage to pornography. And it's like, oh my God, I just wanted to be free. So when this came up, it was not appealing, but I wanted the end result. I mean, to do the hard work is not appealing, but I did want the happy, joyous, and free. I wanted to be free from people controlling my emotions, free from people manipulating me. And the only way that was going to happen is if I was going to take responsibility for my own emotions and my own feelings. Okay? So, so how do we do this? How do you deal with resentment and anger long term? Well, after you dig through these people, what happened, how it affected you, the one thing we have to do is we have to go back to what Jesus told us, you know. And what did Jesus say? We have to forgive. Without forgiveness, there is no escape from anger and resentment. Zippo. You can't do it. I don't care how many shrinks you go to. I don't care how many AA meetings you go to. I don't care how many counselors you get. If you don't learn to forgive the people you have anger and resentment with, you'll never be free. You know? There are things and people that have done great harm to us. As a fact. You can't even get away from it. I've never met anyone unscathed in this life. Some of us have had have had some really serious, deep issues. Some people not so much, but no one goes without any. Okay? And there are times when these people have done great harm to us. The only way to free ourselves from those people and those events is to forgive them. Now, here's the problem. Most people think that forgiveness is like giving someone a get out of jail free card. Like we're going to let them off the hook. Like if I forgive them, then they're not held responsible. Well, I hate to tell you, that's really not the deal. Forgiveness is really for us. It frees us. You know, our forgiveness does nothing to release the person from the responsibility of the behavior they did. It just releases our bondage from the judgment and resentment that we hold over them. Here's the deal. If they don't ever meet Christ themselves like you and I have, they're going to have to answer for what they did. If they meet Christ in this lifetime and they accept him, they're going to have to work on what they did, which means they're going to have to ask God for forgiveness. If they come to know Christ, then Jesus will bear their sin just like he bore our sin. But that's not our business. See, that's the problem here. We are not the arbitrator of someone else's faith life. We're not the arbitrator of someone else's forgiveness. The only person's forgiveness that we have to worry about is our own. First, God forgives us, and then God requires us. You have all said the Lord's Prayer at least once in your life, and it says he's going to forgive us as we have forgiven others. That's how important it is to God. So this forgiveness thing isn't like a passe, I'll try that. No, it's not about trying. It's about doing. It's about doing the hard work to move into forgiveness. Why? Because Jesus bore your sin. You needed forgiveness. You might not have done what they did, but it doesn't matter. You have your own sin to deal with. Jesus bore your sin. If they choose Christ as their Savior, he will bear their sin. And that's between them and God. Not between you and God. Your sin is between you and God. And so it is the forgiveness of others that breaks the chains of our resentments and our emotional slavery to other people. And that's super important because so many people get bound up in these resentments that they destroy everything in their life. I mean, this is why, like people always ask me, well, why do you guys require marriage preparation before you marry people? Well, it's because if you carry the baggage from your last marriage or your last two marriages into this marriage will be dead too. You'll kill it. Nothing changes unless you choose to change it. Things just don't evaporate. Resentment and anger don't go away without you taking them to God. And the mechanism of taking your anger and resentment away is by taking your forgiveness to God and asking God to help you forgive these people. And then giving up your judgment. That's the part of discarding self that's hard. Giving up our judgment. And the truth is we are right. These people suck at what they did to us. But we have no business being God over them. Right? This is the hard part, that we're going to ask God to forgive us and then we're going to hold it over someone else's head, their sin. Ooh, God doesn't think that's a good plan. That's why he requires us to give forgiveness, because we've been receiving his forgiveness. We have to pass on the forgiveness to others. That does nothing about their responsibility. If they never meet Jesus, they're going to go to hell for what they did to us. Period. Now, don't be praying for that, because that's not forgiveness, okay? We should actually be praying the other thing. We should actually be praying that they find Jesus, because they're trapped in their sin as much as we've been trapped in our sin. And see, that's the reality sometimes I think we need to get to, is that we're not any different than anybody else. We like to grade the sin behavior. But the fact is, the sin comes out of the same selfish, self-centered, egotistical little crazy person center. You know, the fear, the self-seeking, the self-pity, the self-delusion, all of that selfishness and self-centeredness is the root cause of everybody's sin. Now, what we want to do is because somebody else's over here grows into a different black hole. Well, my black hole is better than your black hole because it's not as black as your black hole. You know, we want to grade our sin. That's insanity. But see, that's a self-righteous position to get into, thinking that we can grade our sin to alleviate us, but make them go to hell. That's not okay with God. It's not okay with him. If you're going to come to God and ask for your forgiveness, you are going to have to forgive others. That's just the way it is. Now remember, for a lot of people, forgiveness is mistaken for reconciliation. There's a lot of people who need to forgive people who should never reconcile with the people they've forgiven, because they're still toxic. I mean, if you had an abusive father, you know, and he's still an abusive human being, you don't reconcile with him. You have no business reconciling with him. God doesn't ask you to put yourself in a position to be hurt again. God asks you to be free from the bondage of what you're holding over somebody, and then therefore holding yourself into bondage to the anger and resentment. We release them to God. What God does with them is no longer any of our business. That's a hard place to get to, but that's the reality of it. It's not my business what God does with that person. If God wants to lead that person to himself, we should rejoice in that. But, a lot of times we can't. I mean, think about it. You think about Paul, right? In the book of Acts, you have Stephen, who's a deacon. They're going to stone him because he's saying crazy things the Jews hate. So they drag him out of town. They start stoning him. And who's there? Paul. Paul's gathering people's garments so they can throw the rocks better. And he's urging them on to stone Stephen. They kill him. Paul then gets an order from the Pharisees, from the court, from the Sanhedrin, to go arrest Christians who are proclaiming this Jesus guy and drag him back to Jerusalem to have him stoned. And what does God do? God meets him on the road to Damascus. He has a little encounter with Jesus, and Paul's changed. Even the guy who comes to him to help him after he gets taken to Damascus, he's like, God, don't you know who this guy is? It's like God's like, no, I don't know who he is, right? But he's afraid of Paul because he was killing people. What happens? God forgives Paul. Paul then becomes this guy who writes half the freaking New Testament. It's like we want to put God in a position of who he can and can't forgive. Like we're God. See, that's a God play. How do we play God? We talked about that way earlier. That's a God play. Oh, you can't forgive him because he's too bad to be forgiven. Well, that's not how it works. It's between them and God, whether they meet Christ or not. Not you. You have no decision in that. This has nothing to do with you. Your work is to let go of your judgment and your resentment over someone to be free. Free from the bondage of anger and resentment and unforgiveness. Okay? Now, the other thing I want to talk a little bit about is this. I meet these people who are very delusional, and they say, I've heard people say, I don't get angry. Okay, really, right? But I don't believe them. It's crap, right? For the Bible makes it very clear in Ephesians 4:26. It says this in Ephesians 4:26. It says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your anger, which means you're going to get angry, but what are you going to do with it? Now, according to the Bible here, you got today to get it over with. Sun can't set on your anger. Because if it sets on your anger, the next day, it's now resentment. It's no longer anger. Now you're resenting what happened because you're going to relive the anger the next day. That's how resentment starts, because you don't deal with it today. All of us in the program who've learned from years ago, one day at a time, this is one of those one day at a time things. You deal with today's issues in this 24-hour period. Now, once in a while, we might sleep on something if we're going to deal with it in the morning, call our sponsor, talk to our pastor, whatever. But we're not supposed to let the sun set on our anger, and in other words, to make it become a resentment. Okay? So even God's word acknowledges that we get angry. But what we do with our anger then is important, because anger in and of itself is not a sin. You know what I mean? What you do with your anger can be sinful. Okay? I see anger like the lights in a dashboard of your car. Most of the time they never light up. But when they do light up, they tell you that there's something wrong. And that's about as most of us get. We just let the anger go, and we just get into the anger. We never deal with why the anger turned on, why the light went on. We don't want to do the work to discover why we're angry. Right? It's like the guy in the car in front of us in traffic who's a jackwagon, and we're pissed. We're pissed because we can't get our own way. We're pissed because we can't control the guy in front of us. That's why we're angry. But we don't really want to admit that this guy has control over my emotions. Right? Isn't that really what's happening? And most of us never get farther than concluding that our anger is outside of ourselves. I would argue that our anger is always internal. It's always an internal source. And God gave us anger to help us to recognize that there's something going on in us, not something outside of us making us be angry. And I think if you can flip that script from an outside in to an inside out idea, that my anger comes from within me and comes out of me, it's not caused by something outside of me and then comes into me, you can make great strides at overcoming your anger. So what do? We ask ourselves, am I hurt? Am I offended? Has someone wronged me? Am I frustrated? Am I not getting my own way? Am I just being selfish and self-centered and people aren't doing it the way I want them to do it, so I'm pissed off? I don't know. That's for you to decide in every situation. The other thing that we have to do is we have to look at, is this an old scab being picked by a new situation? Like, have you had abandonment issues in your life? If you haven't dealt with the abandonment issue and someone today picks that abandonment scab, there's a good chance that your anger is going to flare up and you're going to be pissed off. And you're going to take the unresolved issue and drag it right in today, and that anger will be bigger than the situation is right now. We do that all the time in relationships. It's really difficult not to carry bad behavior from old relationships into new relationships unless you've dealt with those relationships and the issues that happened during that time you were with the other person. See, what we think is an old flame will put out a new flame. We think just leaving that person and getting someone better will fix it. It doesn't work that way because you carry the scars of the last relationship into this relationship. So it goes back to that inventory thing again. Who was it? What happened? How did it affect me? Why does this make me angry? What emotions has this torched in me in the past? Is this situation now an old scab being picked, or is this a new one? Because if it's an old one, you got to go back and deal with that. If it's a new one, you got to deal with what's now. And if you don't deal with what's in the back, that's in the past, and you don't deal with it, and you don't come to forgiveness and realization and putting it at the foot of the cross and letting Christ take it, you will relive those situations every time someone picks that scab. And it'll rob you of a lot of good situations, because what happens when we do that is that the person in front of us does not get a fair shake because we make assumptions about what they're doing because we connect it to someone else. If it even looks remotely similar, boom, we're back to where we were. The resentment comes up. We're hurt again. We're angry again. Now we're really angry at the person in front of us because they're doing it again. And they might not even be doing it again. They might be doing something totally different. But because we have the unresolved issue in the past, we put it on the new person in the present, and it burns this relationship now again. So the past burns the present. And it's really a bad cycle to get into if you don't take care of some of these long-standing resentments that we have. Excuse me. What we have to do is stay in the real problem and step away from the anger. What do I mean by that? Okay, if my wife says something to me that hurts my feelings, and I don't tell her, and I don't say, that really hurt me, I don't know why you said that, and you don't resolve it with her, you're going to develop a resentment. You're going to be angry. And then you're going to be angry a lot. And then every time she does it again, it's like throwing a nuclear device into the pot. And then one day, if you're a stuffer and you don't really deal with your anger well, you'll have what I call as camel day. The day that the straw that breaks the camel's back. And the reason why I call it camel day is because usually when you blow, it's a little teeny stupid ass thing that happens. But man, you get the whole bucket of straw at one time because you never dealt with the original issue. So then it's camel day, and then it's on. And camel days are not pretty, and they're not constructive for long-term loving relationships. If you're a person who participates in camel day, you need to do something about that if you want to have any friends or you want to have any long-term relationships with someone, like marriage, you can't be having camel days. It's just not the way it works. People can't survive that kind of emotional abuse, So we have to stay in the real problem and walk away from our anger. And anger will always entice you to grasp for control and power when your emotions are awry. You can tell I'm old. I remember when I saw Star Wars for the first time, and Yoda tells Luke that fear is what drives anger. And anger brings pain and suffering. And the path of anger is a dark path. That's the euphemism of Star Wars. But it's so true. Anybody who listens to this, who's honest with themselves, has to admit that most of the time, if not every time, anger's not been beneficial in dealing with our life. It's just not beneficial. So, we have to stay in what is actually happening, and then we have to learn to do something that none of us want to do, and that is embrace the original emotion that happened before the anger. Am I hurt? We have to embrace the hurt. What does that mean, to embrace the hurt? It means to allow the hurt all the way in and then do something about it. See, because when we skip over the hurt and go to anger, we never deal with the hurt. Why am I hurt? What's hurt me? Did they say something? Did they attack me? Why does this hurt me? And I hate to tell you, what you find is when you start doing a lot of inventory on your emotions like this, you're going to find out that you're pretty petty. You have a lot of petty hurts. Little things that hurt your feelings, your little itty bitty feelings. And it's all crap because you're such an emotional basket case and you have such low self-esteem. The littlest thing hurts your feelings, and then you want to get pissed off to get control again. And it's like, it's a really sad place to be. How do I know that? Because that's how I lived. That was me. That's how I lived. That's why I can say this. I don't say this to put it on you. I say it because that's the way I lived for many years. Even into sobriety for many years, I still suffered with a lot of this stuff until I started letting go of some of it, In the end, we have to embrace what we're actually feeling, but we also have to make a decision on what to do with the whole situation. Do I want to be free from my anger? Okay. Now I'm going to tell you something that you need to hear. Most of us need help seeing clearly through what is fueling our emotions. It's really hard work, and most of us are looking through Coke bottle bottom glasses at ourselves. We really struggle with having a clear perception of ourselves, self-perception, especially when we first start dealing with some of this. It's really important to have someone around you who will be honest with you without beating you up, who will tell you the truth. Am I just being a selfish little baby? Yeah, you are. You're just being a selfish baby. You need to let that go. And most of us don't want to do that. But I'm going to tell you something. If you want the back end, if you want the happy, joyous, and free, and contentment, and love from other people, it's necessary. Okay? This is really hard work, but it can be done through the power of the Holy Spirit. It's only when we turn to God and ask His help that we can have the strength to have victory over this area of our lives. I can't say that enough. There's so many things deep in us that are very difficult to deal with, that sometimes we just don't have the resources to deal with it ourselves. We just don't have it. And this is where God can come in and move into our soul and encourage us and help us. It's the same thing. The reason why I said you need someone in your life, those people who are in recovery, we call them sponsors. People in their other world where, maybe you have a pastor or a mentor, whatever word you want to use, but it's someone who's been down this road a little bit longer than us, who can help us, guide us. It's really funny. I have a buddy of mine I used to do prison ministry with, used to raise seeing eye dogs. They would get a blind person and they would introduce them to the dog. And for about a week, they would train the human being to use the dog. Dog didn't need no training. Human being did. Right? Well, obviously, the person's blind. They can't see everything that's going on. So they give the dog to the guy. They put him in the little handle thing. And the trainer, the human trainer, who's training the human to the dog, is usually walking right behind them. And if he has to, he speaks to the person. If he has to, he speaks to the dog. Almost in every single case, he told me, when they're out on their first couple of trips, the dog will stop and the blind person will start yanking on the dog's, collar, that little hoop they hold. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And the car will go by and the dog just saved their life. He says their face, their whole complexion changes because they realized that the dumb dog actually saw something they couldn't. And then they begin to trust the dog, and then they become a team. Well, you got to find yourself a seeing eye dog. You got to find yourself someone who can see things that you can't, who's been on the road long enough to see some of these pitfalls that we fall into. It's good to find someone who has similar experience, but it's not always necessary if they're good. One of the things I tell people is I've learned more from a person who never drank, was celibate his whole life. I mean, he was a Franciscan friar. He taught me more about life than any single person I've ever met. So it's not about having the same experience. He never went to prison, never went to jail, none of that stuff. So it's not necessary to have the exact same experience. What's necessary is that they understand themselves well enough to share their experience with you. Find that person. Work at it. One of the things that people always ask me is, how do I find a sponsor? You don't find one. You start showing up to somebody's life. What do I mean by that? I got people all the time. I tell them, if you want me to be your mentor or sponsor, it's not my job to chase you. I got a busy life. I sponsor a lot of people. I'm very busy. If you want me to mentor you, you got to show up here at my house. Get porch time. Call me on the phone. Get your butt here. Insert yourself into my life. You want to get a mentor? Just start taking them out to dinner. Go over to their house. Knock on the door. Just start showing up. Hang out with them, helping them with their lawn, help them with this, help them with that. Spend time with them. They'll be mentoring you, and sometimes they won't even know it. But this is vitally important to this journey, is to find that person who you can put yourself under. One of the expressions is putting you up under their wing, And I can't emphasize that enough, because through the Spirit of God, God said, when two or more are gathered in my name, I'll be there in the midst. When you gather with someone in God's name for this purpose, God will show up and bring all kinds of things, make all kinds of things happen. I'm serious. It's amazing. If you talk to anybody who's done this for more than a year, they're going to tell you that God has shown up a lot, and as God has relieved them of a lot of things, and it's really, a conducive thing. So, that being said, I'm gonna go over a couple of questions that are in the book. And these are things you need to work on. In what areas through my life do I find myself being angry in regularly? When we have a regular pattern that we get angry in, it tells us there's something there that's unresolved. Okay? You might need some help figuring that out, but let's face it, if you're constantly angry in the same situation over and over and over and over, it ain't the situation, it's you. You have a problem that you need to deal with, okay? Then you have to ask yourself the question, why do I get angry in this situation? What is it tied to in the past? Who is it tied to? Is it tied to a simple person? Is it tied to a series of events? Is it tied to what? I mean, if you're always angry in the same situation, there's something going on. Your job to figure it out, okay? The other thing is you need to figure out in your life right now, if you had to write them down, who you pissed off and angry at still today. Who do you hold resentments against? Who are they? Write them down. Who were they? What did they do? And why did it affect you the way it did? And why are you still angry? I mean, seriously, I met people angry over people 30 years ago that happened to when they were in high school. I mean, I know an individual will tell you stories. No kidding. This is a true story. She literally said, in 4th grade, so-and-so did this to me. That's why I still don't talk to them today. Now, you have to remember the woman's almost 60 years old now. So you're talking 50 years? So 50 years later, you're still pissed off about a locker incident? It's like, holy crap. No wonder you're not happy. But see, you know what? How many of us carry these petty things through our whole life? A lot of us do. I know I did. So, do something about it. So who do you have resentments with? You may need a whole sheet of paper for that one. You know what I mean? Start. Start on this whole deal. Okay? And if you take the time to do it, if you sit down, I mean, this is how I suggest people do it. Start really simple, right? Go back in your relationships, only significant ones. We don't give a crap about Joe the dog catcher. Teachers, parents, brothers, sisters, siblings, best friends in school, maybe the bully, I don't know, right? They're significant because they played a part in our life, okay? And write them down. Do a little inventory on these people. What did they do to me and how did it affect me and why am I still angry? Do the work. And then when you're done with that, if you need help, call me. Send me an email. Come visit me. I'll help anybody who can show up here. I don't like to do phone sponsoring because I can't see your face. But, if you need help and you live in the area around me, I'll be glad to help you. If you send me, some questions, I'll be glad to answer them in an email. But this is the hard work of dealing with ourselves, because this is really uncovering, discovering, and discarding ourselves in a positive way. And so, and if you do this work this week, between now and next Wednesday, next week's seminar session will be even more important for you, because we're going to talk a whole night about unforgiveness and why unforgiveness is a really brutal thing in our life. Because resentment isn't just unforgiveness. Unforgiveness is its whole own animal. So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I hope this has been productive. I hope I've shed some light on for you. If you want it, I'm going to try to get this downloaded and put back up. Some weeks I've been struggling getting it done right away, but they do eventually go up if you want to watch it again or rehear something. And if you really want to, I mean, not that I don't make a lot of money selling books. So if you want to buy a book, go to Amazon and get a book so you can read it slowly through for yourself. I would say that's very helpful. It's $12. It's not a lot of money. So those are the ways you can help. If you live far away, find somebody you can talk to. If you're in the program, get a sponsor. If you're not in the program, go to church. Find some older guy who's got the stuff you want, who seems to be happy, joyous, and free. Talk to your pastor. Say, hey, is there anybody in this church who I might be able to talk to about stuff like this? See what he says. Hopefully you belong to a church where people are kosher and they'll talk to you, but that's it. That's the game. You got to do the work. So hopefully by next week, you'll do some work and next week's seminar will be even better. So have a good night, everyone, and God bless you.